so some things have been changing up in my life, so there was a little pause betwixt me finishing this book. But here we are, finishing it. The winner stands alone. 12:53 p.m. Good morning. You mean good afternoon, don't you? One of the other girls replies, it's midday. Everything is exactly as she had imagined. The 5 other young women waiting all rather resemble her, at least physically. They, however, are heavily made up, wear short skirts and low-cut tops, and are busy with their mobile phones and their texts. No one speaks because they know their soulmates who have all been through the same difficulties and have uncomplainingly faced the same challenges and accepted each knockout blow. They're all trying hard to believe that dreams have no sell-by date, and that life can change from one second to the next, that somewhere the right moment is waiting for them, and that this is just a test of their willpower. They've all perhaps quarreled with their families, who are convinced their daughters will end up working as prostitutes. They've all been on stage and experienced the agony and the ecstasy of seeing the audience and knowing that every eye is fixed on them. They felt the electricity in the air and heard the applause at the end. They've imagined 100 times over that there will come a night when a member of the superclass will be in the audience and visit them in their dressing room after the performance with something more substantial to offer than an invitation to supper, a request for their phone number, or compliments on a job well done. To begin with, they accepted a few of those invitations, but the only place they led to was the bed of some powerful older man, usually married, as the all-interesting men are, concerned only with notching up another conquest. They all had a boyfriend their own age, but when anyone asked if they were married or single, they always answered free and unattached. They thought they were in control of the situation. They've all been told hundreds of times now that they have real talent and just need the right opportunity, and that the person there before them is the one who can transform their lives. They've occasionally believed this too. They've fallen into the trap of being overconfident and thinking they were in charge until the next day came, and the phone number they'd been given put them through to the extension of a very grumpy secretary who had no intention of letting them speak to her boss. They've threatened to sell their story to the tabloids, saying that they've been deceived, although none of them has ever actually done so, because they're still at the age of thinking, I mustn't spoil my chances in the acting world. One or two may even have shared Gabriella's Alice in Wonderland experience, and now want to prove to their families that they're far more capable than they thought. Their families, of course, have all by now seen their daughters in commercials, on posters, and billboards scattered around the city. Then, after a few initial arguments, are convinced that those same daughters are on the verge of entering a world of bright lights and glamour. All the girls there believed that their dream was possible, that one day their talent would be recognized, until the penny dropped. There's only one magic word: contacts. They had all distributed their books as soon as they arrived in cons, and now keep a constant eye on their mobile phones, getting invited to whatever launches and events they can, and trying their best to get into those they can't, always dreaming that someone will ask them to one of the evening parties, or Dream of Dreams award them that greatest of prizes, an invitation to walk down the red carpet at the Palais de Congrès. That, however, was probably the most difficult dream to realize. So difficult that they didn't really allow themselves to think about it, in case the feeling of rejection and frustration destroyed their ability to wear the happy face they must wear all the time. even when they're not happy at all. Contacts. After many cases of mistaken identity, they did find the occasional useful contact, which is why they're here. On one such contact had led to a New Zealand producer calling them. None had asked what it was about. They knew only that they had to be punctual because no one has any time to lose, certainly not people in the film industry. And the only ones who do are the 5 young women in the waiting room, busy with their mobile phones and their magazines, compulsively sending texts to see if they've been invited to something later in the day, trying to talk to their friends, and always making a point of saying that they're not free to speak right now because they have an important meeting, with a film producer. Aha, my eyes deceived me. Gabriella is the 4th person to be called. She had tried to interpret the look in the eyes of the first 3 candidates who emerged from the room without saying a word, but then, of course, they're all actresses capable of hiding any emotion, be it joy or sadness. All 3 strode determinedly to the door, and wished the others a confident good luck, as if to say, "No need to be nervous, girls. You've got nothing to lose. That part's mine." One of the walls in the apartment is covered with a black cloth. The floor is cluttered with all kinds of electric cables and lights covered with a metal flashing mesh. And there's a kind of umbrella with a white cloth spread before it, as well as sound equipment, screens, and a video camera in the corners. Stand bottles of mineral water, metal briefcases, tripods, bits of paper, and a computer sitting on the floor. A bespectacled 30-something woman is leafing through Gabriella's book. "Awful," she says, not looking up at her. "Awful." Gabriella doesn't know quite what to do. Perhaps she should pretend she isn't listening and go over to the group of chain-smoking technicians chatting brightly in one corner, or perhaps she should simply stay where she is. "This one's awful," said the woman again. "That's me." She can't help herself. She has run through half of cons, to get there, waited nearly 2 hours, imagined yet again that her life is about to change forever, although she's less and less prone to such fantasies now, and won't allow herself to get as excited as she used to, and she certainly doesn't need any more reasons to be depressed. "I know," says the woman, her eyes fixed on the photos. "They must have cost you a fortune. People make a career out of making books, writing CVs, running acting courses, and generally making money out of the vanity of people like you. If you think I'm so awful, why did you call me?" "Because we need someone awful." Gabriella laughs. The woman finally raises her head and looks her up and down. "I liked your clothes. I hate vulgar people." Gabriella's dream is returning. Her heart beats faster. The woman hands her a sheet of paper. "Go over there to the mark." Then she turns to the crew. "Put those cigarettes out and close the window. I don't want the sound messed up." The mark is a cross made with a yellow tape on the floor. This means that the actor is automatically in the right position for the lighting and the camera. "It's so hot in here. I'm sweating. Could I at least go to the bathroom and put a little foundation on, some makeup?" "Of course you can, but when you get back there won't be time to do the recording. We have to hand the stuff over by this afternoon." All the other girls who went in must have asked the same question, and been given the same answer. Best not to waste time. She takes a paper handkerchief out of her pocket and dabs her face as she makes her way over to the mark. An assistant positions himself by the camera while Gabriella battles against time and trying to read through what is written on that half sheet of paper. "Test number 25, Gabriella Sherry, Thompson Agency." 25, thinks Gabriella. "And action," says the woman. With the glasses, silence falls. "No, I can't believe what you're saying. No one can commit murder for no reason." "Start again, you're talking to your boyfriend." "No, I can't believe what you're saying. No one can commit a murder like that for no reason." The words, "like that," aren't in the script. Do you really think that the scriptwriter who worked on this for months didn't consider putting those words in, but decided against it because they're useless, superficial, and unnecessary? Gabriella takes a deep breath. She has nothing to lose but her patience. She's going to do her best now. And then leave, go to the beach, or go back to bed for a while. She needs to rest in order to be in good shape for the evening round of cocktail parties. A strange, delicious calm comes over her. Suddenly she feels protected, loved, and grateful to be alive. No one's forcing her to be there, enduring yet another humiliation. For the first time in years, she's aware of her power. A power she had never thought existed. No, I don't believe what you're saying. No one can commit a murder for no reason. Next line. There was no need for her to say that. Gabriella was going to continue anyway. We'd better go and see a doctor. I think you need help. No, said the woman in glasses who was playing the part of the boyfriend. Okay, no doctor then. How about a little walk? And you can tell me exactly what's going on. I love you, you know, and I love you, you know. And even if no one else in the world cares about you, I do. There are no more lines. Another silence. A strange energy fills the room. Tell the other girl out there she can go, says the woman in the glasses to one of the other people present. Does this mean what Gabriella thinks it means? Go to the marina at the end of the Boulevard de la Crusette, opposite Allée des Palmiers. Allée des Palmiers. A boat will be waiting there at 1:55 prompt to take you to meet Mr. Gibson. We're going to send him the video now, but he always likes to meet the people he might be working with. A smile appears on Gabriella's face. I said might. I didn't say will be working with. The smile remains. Mr. Gibson. Right. Turn off my thing. My alarm was going off. 1:19 p.m. Lying on a stainless steel table between Inspector Savoy and the pathologist is a beautiful young woman of about 20, completely naked and dead. Are you sure? The pathologist goes over to the stainless steel sink, removes his rubber gloves, throws them in the bin, and turns on the tap. Absolutely. There's no trace of drugs. What happened then? Could a young woman like her have had a heart attack? The only noise in the room is that of running water, the pathologist thinks. They always come up with the obvious. Drugs, heart attack. He takes longer than necessary to wash his hands. A little suspense never goes amiss. He applies disinfectant to his arms and throws away the disposable material used in the autopsy. Then he turns around and asks the inspector to study the body. No, really, take a good look. Don't be embarrassed. Noticing details is part of your job, isn't it? Savoy carefully examines the body. At one point, he reaches out to lift one of the girl's arms, but the pathologist stops him. No need to touch. Savoy runs his eyes over the girl's naked body. He knows quite a lot about her now. Olivia Martins, the daughter of Portuguese parents, currently going out with a young man of no fixed profession who is heavily into cons nightlife and is at that moment being interrogated at a police station some way away. A judge issued a search warrant for his apartment and they found some small flasks of THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, the main hallucinogenic element in marijuana, which can be taken dissolved in sesame oil, which leaves no smell and has a far stronger effect than when the substance is absorbed through smoke. It's funny, I had some RSO earlier. Anyway. They also found 6 envelopes containing a gram of cocaine and some bloodstains on a sheet, which is now on its way to a laboratory for tests. He is probably, at most, a minor dealer. He is already known to the police, having spent a couple spells in prison, but never for physical violence. Olivia was lovely, even in death. Her dark eyebrows, that childlike air, her breasts. No, he thinks. I mustn't go there. I'm a professional. All right. I can't see anything, he says. The pathologist smiles. Savoy finds his smugness slightly irritating. The expert points to a small, purplish, almost imperceptible mark between the girl's left shoulder and her throat. Then he shows him another similar mark on the right hand side of her torso, between two of her ribs. I could begin by giving you the technical details. Death was caused by obstruction of the jugular vein and the carotid artery, while simultaneously similar pressure was being applied to a particular sheaf of nerves, but so precisely that it caused the complete paralysis of the upper part of the body. Savoy says nothing. The pathologist realizes that this is not the moment to show off his knowledge or to make jokes. He feels rather sorry for himself. He works with death on a daily basis and spends each day surrounded by corpses and grave-faced people. His children never tell anyone what their father does, and he has nothing to talk about at supper parties because people hate discussing what they perceive to be macabre topics. He sometimes wonders if he hasn't perhaps chosen the wrong profession. In short, she was strangled. Savoy still says nothing. His brain is working very fast. How could someone possibly be strangled on the Boulevard de la Croisette in broad daylight? Her parents had been interviewed, and they said that their daughter had left the house that morning with the usual merchandise, illegal merchandise, it must be said, because street vendors pay no taxes and are therefore banned from trading, although that's hardly relevant now, he thinks. The intriguing thing about this particular case, says the pathologist, is that in a normal case of strangulation, these are marks on both shoulders, or there are marks on both shoulders. That is, in the classic scene in which the attacker grabs the victim around the throat, and the victim struggles to get free. In this case, only one hand, or rather one finger, stopped the blood reaching the brain, while another finger paralyzed the body, rendering her incapable of fighting back. This required a very sophisticated technique and a detailed knowledge of the human body. Could she have been killed somewhere else and carried to the bench where we found her? If so, there would be other marks on the body. That was the first thing I looked for, assuming she was killed by just one person. When I found no marks, I looked for any indication that she had been grabbed by the wrists or ankles. If, that is, we were dealing with more than one killer, but there was nothing to indicate this. Indeed, without wishing to go into more technical detail, there are certain things that happen at the moment of death which leave traces in the body. Urine, for example. What are you saying? As she was killed, where she was found, and that, judging by the finger marks on her body, only one person was involved. That since no one saw her trying to run away, she clearly knew her killer. He was seated on her left side, and that her killer must be someone highly trained with an extensive knowledge of martial arts. Savoy nods his thanks and walks quickly to the exit. On the way, he phones the police station where the boyfriend is being interrogated. Forget about drugs, he says. We have a murder on our hands. Try and find out what the boyfriend knows about martial arts. I'm coming straight over. No, says the voice on the other end. Go straight to the hospital. I think we have another problem. 1:28 p.m. A seagull was flying over a beach. When it saw a mouse, it flew down and asked the mouse, "Where are your wings?" Each animal speaks its own language, and so the mouse didn't understand the question, but stared at the two strange large things attached to the other creature's body. It must have some illness, thought the mouse. The seagull noticed the mouse staring at its wings and thought, "Poor thing, it must have been attacked by monsters that left it deaf and took away its wings." Feeling sorry for the mouse, the seagull picked it up in its beak, took it for a ride in the skies. It's probably homesick, the seagull thought while they were flying, and then very carefully it deposited the mouse once more on the ground. For some months afterward, the mouse was sunk in gloom. It had known the heights and seen the vast and beautiful world. However, in time it grew accustomed to being just a mouse again, and came to believe that the miracle that had occurred in its life was nothing but a dream. This was a story from her childhood, but right now she's up in the sky. She can see the turquoise sea, the luxurious yachts, um, the people small as ants below, the tents on the beach, the hills, the horizon to her left, beyond which lay Africa and all its problems. The ground is approaching fast. It's best to view humankind from on high, she thinks. Only then can we see how very small we are. Ewa seems very bored, either that or nervous. Hamid never really knows what's going on in his wife's head. Even though they've been together for more than 2 years now, it's true, is a trial for everyone concerned. But he can't leave the festival any earlier than planned. Besides, he should be used to all this because the life of her ex-husband hadn't been so very different. With suppers to attend, events to organize, and having constantly to change country, continent, and language. Was she always like this, or is it that she doesn't love me as much as she did at first? A forbidden thought. Concentrate on other things, please. The noise of the engine doesn't allow for conversation unless you use the headphones with the microphone attached. Ewa hasn't even picked hers up from the hook beside her seat. Not that there's any point in asking her to put them on so that he can tell her for the 1,000th time that she's the most important woman in his life and that he'll do his best to make sure she enjoys this week at this, that she enjoys the week at this. Her first cons festival. The sound system on board is set up so that every conversation can be overheard by the pilot, and Ewa hates the public displays of affection. There they are in that glass bubble, just about to touch down. He can see the huge white car, a Maybach, the most expensive and most sophisticated car in the world, even more exclusive than Rolls-Royce. Soon they'll be sitting inside, listening to some relaxing music and drinking iced champagne or mineral water. He consults his platinum watch, which is a certified copy of one of the first models produced in a small workshop in the town of Schaffhausen. Sorry. Women can get away with spending a fortune on diamonds, but a watch is the only piece of jewelry allowed to a man of good taste. That's not true. And only the true cognoscenti knew the significance of that watch, which was rarely advertised in the glossy magazines. And that could be a definition of true sophistication, knowing where to find the best, even if the other people have never heard of it, and producing the very best too, regardless of what others might say. It was already nearly 2:00 in the afternoon, and he needed to talk to his stockbroker in New York before trading opened on the stock exchange. When he arrived, it was like a little mini hiccup. When he arrived, he would make a call, just one, with his instructions for the day, making money at the casino, as he called the investment funds. It was not his favorite sport. However, he had to pretend to be keeping an eye on what his managers and financial engineers were up to. He could rely on the protection, support, and vigilance of the sheik. But nevertheless, he had to demonstrate that he was up to date on what was happening. He might, in the end, have to make 2 phone calls, but give no concrete instructions on what to buy or sell. His energy is focused on something else, That afternoon, at least 2 actresses, one famous and one unknown, will be walking down the red carpet wearing his dresses. Obviously, he has assistants who can take care of everything, but he likes to be personally involved, even if only to remind himself that every detail is important and that he hasn't lost touch with the basis on which he built his empire. Apart from that, he wants to spend the rest of his time in France, trying to enjoy Iwa's company to the full, introducing her to interesting people, strolling on the beach, lunching together in some small restaurant in a nearby town, or walking along hand in hand through the vineyards he can see on the horizon. He had always felt he was incapable of falling in love with anything other than his work, although the list of his conquests includes an enviable series of relationships with some even more enviable women. The moment Iwa appeared on the scene, though he was a different man, they have been together for 2 years, and his love is stronger and more intense than ever. In love, him, Hamid Hussein, Hamid Hussein, whatever. One of the most famous designers on the planet, the public face of a gigantic international conglomerate selling luxury and glamour. And the man who had battled against everything and everyone, who had challenged all the West's preconceived ideas about people from the Middle East and their religion, the man who had used the ancestral knowledge of his tribe to survive, learn, and reach the top. Contrary to rumor, he was not from a rich oil family. His father had been the seller of cloth, who one day had found favor with a sheik simply because he refused to do as he was told. That's honestly how my dreams are going to come true. Somebody is going to admire the fact that I don't do what I'm told. You're not the boss of me. Oh. Alright. Whenever Hamid had doubts about what decision to make, he liked to remember the example he had received in adolescence. Say no to powerful people, even when doing so means taking a great risk. It had almost always worked, and on the few occasions when it hadn't, the consequences were not as grave as he had imagined. And his father had not, alas, lived to see his son's success. When the sheiks started buying up all the available land in the part of the desert in order to build one of the most modern cities in the world, his father had had the courage to say to one of the sheik's emissaries, "I'm not selling. My family has been here for centuries. We buried our dead here. We learned to survive storms and invaders. We cannot sell the place that God charged us to take care of." The emissaries increased their offer, and when he still refused, they got angry and threatened to do whatever was necessary to remove him. The sheik, too, began to grow impatient. He wanted to start his project straight away because he had big plans. The price of oil had risen on the international market, and the money needed to be spent before the oil reserves ran out and any possibility of building an infrastructure to attract foreign investments vanished. Still, old Hussein refused to sell his property, whatever the price. Then the sheik decided to go and speak to him directly. "I can offer you anything you desire," he said. "Then give my son a good education. He's 16 now, and there are no prospects for him here. Only if you sell me your house." There was a long silence. Then his father, looking straight at the sheik, said something the latter had never expected to hear. "You, sir, have a duty to educate your subjects, and I could not exchange my family's future for its past." Hamid recalls the look of immense sadness in his father's eyes as he went on. "But if you can at least give my son a chance in life, then I will accept your offer." The sheik left without saying another word. The following day, he asked Hamid's father to send his son to him so that they could talk. After walking down blocked roads past gigantic cranes, laborers tirelessly working, the whole quarters in the process being demolished, Hamid finally reached the palace that had been built beside the old port. The sheik came straight to the point. You know what I want, or you know that I want to buy your father's house. There is very little oil left in our country, and we must wean ourselves off oil and find other paths before the oil wells run dry. We will prove to the world that we can sell not only oil but our services too. Meanwhile, in order to take those first steps, we need to make some major reforms, like building a good airport, for example. We need land so that foreigners can build on it. My dream is that just my dream is a just one, and my intentions are good. Oh, my dream is a just one and my intentions are good. Okay. One thing we're going to need are more experts in the field of finance. Now you heard the conversation between myself and your father. Hamid tried to disguise his fear, for there were more than a dozen people listening to their conversation. However, his heart had an answer ready for each question he was asked. So tell me, what do you want to do? Asked the sheik. I want to study haute couture, haute couture, whatever, fancy shit. The other people present looked at each other. They might not even have known what he meant. My father sells much of the cloth he buys to foreigners, who then turn his cloth into designer clothes and earn 100 times more from it than he does. I'm sure we could do the same here. I'm convinced that fashion could be one way of breaking down the prejudices the rest of the world has about us. If they could be made to see that we don't dress like barbarians, they would find it easier to accept us. This time he heard murmurings in the court. Was he talking about clothes? That was something for Westerners, who were more concerned with how people looked on the outside than with what they were like on the inside. On the other hand, the price of my father's pain is very high. I would prefer to keep our house. I will work with the cloth he has, and if merciful God so desires it, I will realize my dream. I, like your majesty, know what I want. The court listened in amazement to hear this boy not only challenging the region's great leader, but refusing to accept his own father's wishes. The sheik, however, smiled. And where does one study haute couture? In France or Italy, working with the great masters. There are universities where one can study, but there's no substitute for experience. It won't be easy, but if merciful God so wishes, I will succeed. The sheik asked him to come back later that afternoon. Hamid strolled down to the port, visited the bazaar, where he marveled at the colors, the cloths, the embroidery. He loved visiting the bazaar, and it saddened him to think that it would soon be destroyed because a part of the past and part of tradition would be lost. Was it possible to stop progress? Would it be sensible to try and stop the development of a nation? He remembered the many nights he had sat up late, drawing by candlelight, copying the clothes the Bedouin wore, afraid that tribal costumes would also one day be destroyed by cranes and by foreign investment. At that appointed hour, he returned to the palace. There were even more people with the sheik now. I have made two decisions, said the sheik. First, I'm going to pay your expenses for a year. We have enough boys interested in a career in the financial sector, but you are first to express a wish to learn sewing. It seems utter madness, but then everyone tells me my dreams are mad too. And yet, look where they've got me. I cannot go against my own example. On the other hand, none of my assistants has any contacts among the people you mention. And so I will be paying you a small monthly allowance to keep you from having to beg in the streets. You will return a winner. You will represent our country. And it's important that other nations should learn to respect our culture. Before leaving, you will have to learn the languages of the countries to which you are going. Which languages are they? English, French, and Italian. I am most grateful to you for your generosity, but what about my father?" The sheik gestured to him to be silent. "My second decision is as follows. Your father's house will remain where it is. In my dreams, it will be surrounded by skyscrapers. No sun will enter its windows, and in the end, he will have to move. However, the house will stay there forever. In the future, people will remember me and say he was a great man because he changed his country, and he was just because he respected the rights of a seller of cloth." The helicopter lands at the very end of the pier, and he leaves aside his memories. He gets out first and then proffers Iwa a helping hand. He touches her skin and looks proudly at this blonde woman, all dressed in white, her clothes glowing in the sunlight, her other hand holding on to the lovely, discreet beige hat she is wearing. They walk past the ranks of yachts moored on either side, together or toward the car that awaits them, and the chauffeur standing with the door already open. He holds his wife's hand and whispers in her ear, "I hope you enjoyed the lunch. They're great collectors of art, and it was very generous of them to provide a helicopter for us." "Yes, I loved it, but what Iwa really means is, no, I hated it. Worse, I'm feeling really frightened. I've just received a text on my mobile phone, and I know who sent it, even though I can't identify the number." They get into the vast car made for just two people, the rest being empty space. The air conditioning is set at the ideal temperature. The music is exactly right for such a moment, and no outside no outside noise penetrates their perfect isolation. He sits down on the comfortable leather seat, opens the minibar in front of them, and asks if Iwa would like some champagne. "No," she says, "mineral water will be fine. I saw your ex-husband yesterday in the hotel bar before we left for supper. That's impossible. He has no business in Cannes." She would like to have said, "You may be right. I've just received a text. We should board the next plane out of here, actually. I'm quite sure it was him." Hamid notices that his wife is not in the mood to talk. He has been brought up to respect the privacy of those he loves, and so he makes himself think of something else. Having first asked Iwa's permission, he makes the obligatory phone call to his stockbroker in New York. He listens patiently for 2 or 3 sentences and politely interrupts any further news on the market trend. The whole call lasts no more than 2 minutes. He makes another call to the director he has chosen for his first film. The director is on his way to the boat to meet with the star, and yes, a young actress has been chosen and should be joining them shortly. He turns to Iwa again, but she still seems disinclined to talk, her gaze absent, staring at the limousine windows at nothing. Perhaps she's worried because she'll have so little time at the hotel. She'll have to change immediately and go straight to a rather insignificant fashion show by a Belgian designer where Hamid wants to see for himself the young African model, Jasmine, whom his assistants tell him will be the ideal face for his next collection. He wants to know how the girl will survive the pressures of an event in Cannes. If everything goes as planned, she'll be one of his star models at the Fashion Week in Paris set for October. Blah. As you can tell, I'm quite a fashionista, and I care. Iwa keeps her eyes fixed on the window. Not that she is interested in what's going on outside. She knows the gentle, creative, determined, well-dressed man by her side very well. She knows that he desires her as no man has ever desired a woman. Part, that is, from the man she left. She can trust him, even though she lives surrounded by some of the most beautiful women in the world. He's an honest, hard-working man who has met and overcome many challenges in order to be chauffeured around in that limo and to be able to offer her a glass of champagne or her favorite mineral water. He is powerful and capable of protecting her from any danger except one, the worst of all, her ex-husband. She doesn't want to arouse suspicions now by picking up her phone again to reread the message. She knows the message by heart. I have destroyed a world for you, Katyusha. Katyusha. I like that. I've destroyed the world for you, Katyusha. Let me say this better. I've destroyed the world for you, Katyusha. She has no idea what these words mean, but no one else would call her by that name. She has taught herself to love Hamid, although she detests the life she leads, the parties they go to, and his friends. She doesn't know yet if she has succeeded in making herself love him. There are moments when she feels almost suicidal with despair. All she knows is that he was her salvation at a time when she thought she was lost forever, incapable of escaping the trap of her marriage. Many years before, she had fallen in love with an angel, with a sad childhood, who had been called up into the Soviet army to fight in an absurd war in Afghanistan, only to return to a country verging on collapse. Despite this, he had overcome all difficulties to succeed. He began to work very hard, getting loans from some very shady people, then lying awake at night, worrying about the risk he was taking, and wondering how he could ever repay those loans. He put up uncomplainingly with the endemic corruption, accepting that he would have to bribe a government official each time he needed a new license for a product that would improve the quality of life of his own people. He was idealistic and affectionate. By day, his leadership went unquestioned because life had taught him how to lead, and military service had helped him understand exactly how hierarchies work. At night, he would cling to her and ask her to protect and advise him to pray for everything to go well and for him to avoid the many traps that lay in his path each day. Ewa would stroke his hair and assure him that everything was fine, that he was a good man, and that God always rewarded the just. Gradually, the difficulties gave way to opportunities. The small business he had started after almost begging people to sign contracts began to grow because he was one of the few to have invested in something that no one believed could work in a country still plagued by near obsolete communication networks. The government changed and corruption diminished. Money began to come in slowly at first, and then in vast quantities. However, they never forgot the difficult times they had been through and never wasted a penny. They made contributions to charities and to associations for ex-soldiers. They lived unostentatiously, dreaming of the day when they would put it all behind them and go and live in a house away from the world. When that happened, they would forget that they had once been obliged to have dealings with people who had no ethics and no dignity. They spent much of their time in airports, planes, and hotels. They worked 18 hours a day and for years never managed to take a month's holiday together. They nurtured the same dream. The moment would come when that frenetic pace of life would be but a distant memory. The scars from that period would be like medals won in a war waged in the name of faith and dreams. After all, each human being, or so she believed then, had been born to love and to live with their beloved. The whole process of finding work was suddenly turned on its head. Instead of them having to hunt down contracts, they began to appear spontaneously. Her husband was featured on the front cover of an important business magazine, and the local bigwigs started sending them invitations to parties and events. They began to be treated like royalty, and ever greater quantities of money flowed in. They had to adapt to these changes, or to these changed circumstances. They bought a beautiful house in Moscow, a house with every possible comfort. For reasons she didn't and preferred not to know, her husband's old associates ended up in prison. They were the same associates who had made those initial loans, of which, despite exorbitant interest rates, Igor has paid back every penny. From then on, Igor began to be accompanied everywhere by bodyguards. Only two at first, fellow veterans and friends from the Afghan War, but they were later joined by others as the small company grew into a multinational giant with branches in several countries and 7 different time zones, making ever more diverse investments. He always spent her days in shopping malls or having tea with friends who always talked about the same things. Igor, of course, wanted to go further and further. After all, he had only got where he was by a dint of ambition and hard work. Whenever she asked if they had not gone far beyond what they had planned, and if it wasn't time to realize their dream of living only on the love they felt for each other, he always asked for a little more time, and he began to drink more heavily. One night, they came home after a long supper with friends, during which much wine and vodka had been drunk. She could contain her feelings no longer. She said she couldn't stand the empty existence she was leading. If she couldn't do something soon, she would go mad. Wasn't she satisfied with what she had? Asked Igor. Yes, I'm satisfied, but the problem is you're not, and never will be. You're insecure, afraid of losing everything you've achieved. You don't know how to quit once you're ahead. You'll end up destroying yourself. You're killing our marriage and my love. This wasn't the first time she had spoken thus to her husband. They had always been very honest with each other, but she felt she was reaching a limit. She had had enough of the shopping and the tea parties and the ghastly television programs that she watched while waiting for him to come home from work. Don't say that. Don't say I'm killing our love. I promise that soon we'll leave all this behind us. Just be patient. Perhaps you should start some project of your own, because your life at the moment really must be pretty hellish. At least he recognized that. What would you like to do? He asked. Yes, she thought perhaps that would be a way out. I'd like to work with fashion. That's always been my dream. Her husband immediately granted her wish. The following week, he turned up with his keys to a shop in one of the best shopping malls in Moscow. Eva was thrilled. Her life took on a new meaning. The long days and nights spent waiting would be over for good. She borrowed money, and Igor invested enough in the business for her to have a good chance at success. Suppers and parties where she had always felt like an outsider took on a new interest for her. In just 2 years, thanks to contracts made at such social events, she was running the most successful haute couture shop in Moscow. Although she had a joint account with her husband, and he never questioned how much she spent, she made a point of paying back the money he had lent her. She started going off on business trips alone, looking for new designs and exclusive brands. She took on staff, got to grips with the accounts, and became, to her own surprise, an excellent businesswoman. Igor had taught her everything. He was a great role model and example to be followed. And just as everything was going so well, her life had taken on a new meaning. The angel of light that had lit her path began to waver. They were in a restaurant in Irkutsk. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Whatever. After spending a weekend in a fishing village on the shores of Lake Baikal, By that stage, the company owned 2 planes and a helicopter so that they could travel as far as they liked and be back on Monday to start all over again. Neither of them complained about spending so little time together, but it was clear that the many years of struggle were beginning to take their toll. Still, they knew that their love was stronger than everything else, and as long as they were together, they would be all right. In the middle of a candlelit supper, a drunken beggar came into the restaurant, walked over to their table, sat down, and began to talk, interrupting their precious moment alone. Far from the hustle and bustle of Moscow, a minute later the owner offered to remove him, but Igor said he would take care of it. The beggar grew animated, picked up their bottle of vodka, and drank from it. Then he started asking questions. Who are you? How come you've got so much money when we all live in such poverty here? And generally complaining about life and about the government, Igor put up with this for a few more minutes. He got to his feet, took the man by the arm, and led him outside. The restaurant was in an unpaved street. His 2 bodyguards were waiting for him. Ewa saw through the window that her husband barely spoke to them, apart from issuing some order along the lines of, keep an eye on my wife, and headed off toward a small side street where he came back a few minutes later, smiling. Well, he won't be bothering anyone ever again. Ewa noticed a different light in his eyes. They seemed to be filled by an immense joy, far greater than any joy he had shown during the weekend they had spent together. What did you do? Igor did not reply, but simply called for more vodka. They both drank steadily into the night, be happy and smiling, and she choosing to understand only what she wanted to understand. He had always been so generous with those less fortunate than himself, so perhaps he had given the man money to help him out of his poverty. When they went back to the hotel, he said, it's something I learned in my youth, when I was fighting in an unjust war for an ideal I didn't believe in. There's always a way of putting an end to poverty. No, Igor can't be here in Cons. Hamid must have made a mistake. The 2 men had only met once before, in the foyer of the building, where they lived in London. When Igor had found out their address, had gone there to beg Ewa to come back, Hamid had spoken to him but hadn't allowed him to come in. Threatening to call the police, for a whole week she had refused to leave their apartment, claiming to have a headache, but knowing that the angel of light had turned into absolute evil. She looks at her phone again and rereads the message. Katyusha. Only one person would call her by that name. The person who lives in her past and will terrorize her present for the rest of her life, however protected she feels, however far away she lives, and even though she inhabits a world to which he has no access, the same person who, on their return from Irkutsk, as if he had sloughed off an enormous weight, had begun to speak more freely about the shadows that inhabited his soul. No one, absolutely no one, can threaten our privacy. We've spent long enough creating a fairer, more humane society. Anyone who fails to respect our moments of freedom should be removed in such a way that they'll never even consider coming back. Ewa was afraid to ask what in such a way meant. She had thought she knew her husband, but from one moment to the next, it seemed a submerged volcano had begun to roar, and the shock waves were getting stronger and stronger. She remembered certain late night conversations with him when he was still a young man, and how he had told her during the war in Afghanistan he had sometimes been forced to kill in self-defense. She had never seen regret or remorse in his eyes. I survived, and that's what matters. My life could have ended one sunny afternoon or at dawn in the snow-covered mountains, or one night when we were playing cards in our tent, confident that the situation was under control, and if I had died, nothing would have changed in the world. I would have just been another statistic for the army and another medal for the family. But Jesus helped me, and I was blessed with quick reactions. And because I survived the hardest tests a man can face, fate has given me the two most important things in life: success at work and the person I love. It was one thing killing in order to save your own life, but quite another to remove for good. Some poor drunk who had interrupted, their supper, and who could easily have been shepherded away by the restaurant owner. She couldn't get the idea out of her head. She started going ever earlier to the shop, and when she came home, sitting at her computer until late into the night, there was a question she wanted to avoid. She managed to carry on like this for some months, following the usual routine: business trips, parties, suppers, meetings, charity auctions. She even wondered if she had misunderstood what her husband had said in Irkutsk, and blamed herself for making such a snap judgment. Time passed and the questions became less important, until the night they attended a gala supper cum charity auction at one of the most expensive restaurants in Milan. They were both there for different reasons. Igor in order to firm up the details of a contract with an Italian firm, and Iwa in order to attend the fashion week, where she intended to make a few purchases for her Moscow shop. And what had happened in the middle of Siberia was repeated in one of the most sophisticated cities in the world. This time, a friend of theirs, rather the worse for wear, sat down at their table uninvited and started joking and making inappropriate remarks. Iwa saw Igor's hand grip the handle of his knife more tightly. As tactfully and politely as possible, she asked the friend to go away. By then, she had already drunk several glasses of Asti Spumante, as the Italians referred to what used to be called champagne, because the use of the word champagne was banned under the so-called protected designation of origin. Champagne simply means a white wine made using a particular bacteria, which, when rigorously controlled, begins to generate gases inside the bottle as the wine ages over a period of at least 15 months. The name refers to the region where it's produced. Spumante is exactly the same thing, but European law doesn't allow it to be known by the French name, since the vineyards are in Italy and not in the Champagne region of France. They started talking about champagne and about the laws governing names while she tried to drive from her head the question she had tried to suppress, and which was now returning in full force. While they were talking, she kept drinking until there came a moment when she could hold back no longer. What does it matter if someone gets a little drunk and comes over to talk to us? When he answered, Igor's voice had changed. Because we so rarely travel together. Besides, do you know what I think about the world we live in? That we're being suffocated by lies, encouraged to put our faith in science rather than in spiritual values, and to feed our souls with things society tells us are important, when in reality we're slowly dying because we know what's going on around us, that we're being forced to do things we never planned to do, and yet even so are incapable of giving it all up and devoting our days and nights to true happiness, to family, nature, love. And why is that? Because we feel obliged to finish what we started, and so that we can achieve the financial stability we need in order to enjoy the rest of our lives, devoting ourselves to each other, because we're responsible people. I know you sometimes think I work too much, but it's not true. I'm building our future, and soon we'll be free to dream and live out our dreams. Financial stability was hardly something they lacked. They had no debts, and they could have gotten up from that table there then with just their credit cards and simply left behind them the world Igor apparently hated and started all over again and never have to worry about money. She had often spoken to him about this, and Igor always said the same thing: it won't be much longer. Besides, this wasn't the moment to discuss their future as a couple. God thought of everything, he went on. We are together because he decided we should be. You may not fully appreciate your importance in my life, but without you, I would never have got where I am today. He placed us side by side and lent me his power to defend you whenever necessary. He taught me that everything is part of a plan, and I must respect that plan down to the last detail. If I hadn't done so, I would either be dead in Kabul or living in poverty in Moscow. And it was then that the spumante, or champagne, revealed what it was capable of, regardless of what it was called. What happened to that beggar in Siberia? She asked. Igor didn't at first know what she was talking about. Iwa reminded him of what had happened in the restaurant there. I'd like to know what you did. I saved him. She gave a sigh of relief. I saved him from a filthy, hopeless life in those freezing winters with his body being slowly destroyed by booze. I let his soul depart toward the light because the moment he came into that restaurant to destroy our happiness, I knew that his spirit was inhabited by the evil one. Iwa felt her heart begin to pound. She didn't need him to say outright, I killed him. It was clear that he had. Without you, I don't exist. Anything and everyone who tries to separate us or destroy the little time we have together at this particular moment in our lives gets the treatment they deserve. Meaning, perhaps, that they deserve to be killed. Could such a thing have happened before without her noticing? She drank and drank some more, and Igor began to relax again. Since he never opened his heart to anybody else, he loved their conversations. We speak the same language, he went on. We see the world in the same way. We complete each other with the perfection that is granted only to those who put love above all else. As I said, without you, I don't exist. Look at the super class around us. They think they're so important, so socially aware, because they're willing to pay a fortune for some useless item at a charity auction, or to attend a supper organized to raise funds to help the homeless in Rwanda, or to save the pandas in China. Pandas and the homeless are all one to them. They feel special, superior to the average person, because they're doing something useful. Have they ever fought in a war? No. They create wars, but they don't fight in them. If the war turns out well, they get all the credit. If not, others get the blame. And they're in love with themselves. My love, I'd like to ask you something else. At that point, a presenter climbed onto the stage and thanked everyone for being there that night. The money raised would go toward buying medicine for refugee camps in Africa. What he doesn't say, Igor went on, as if he hadn't heard her, is that only 10% of the total amount raised will reach its destination. The rest will be used to pay for this event, for the cost of this supper, for the publicity and the organizers, in short, for the people who had the brilliant idea in the first place. And all at an exorbitant price. So they use poverty as a way to get even richer. So why are we here? Because we need to be. It's part of my work. I have no intention of saving Rwanda or sending medicine to refugees, but at least I know that I don't. The other guests here tonight are using their money to wash their conscience and their soul clean of the guilt When the genocide was going on in Rwanda, I financed a small army of friends who prevented more than 2,000 deaths. Did you know that? No, you never told me. I didn't need to. You know that I care about people. The auction began with a small Louis Vuitton travel bag. It sold for 10 times its retail price. Igor watched the auction impassively while she drank another glass of spumante and wondered whether she should or shouldn't ask that question. An artist danced to a soundtrack provided by Marilyn Monroe and simultaneously painted a picture. The bids for the finished work of art were sky high, the price of a small apartment in Moscow. Another glass of wine, another item sold. For an equally absurd price, she drank so much that night that she had to be carried back to the hotel before he put her into bed and before she fell asleep. She finally got up the courage to ask, "And what if I were to leave you? Drink less next time. Answer me. That would never happen. Our marriage is perfect." Common sense returned, but she knew she had an excuse now, so pretended to be drunker than she was. "Yeah, but what if I did? I'd make you come back, and I'm good at getting what I want, even if that means destroying whole worlds. And what if I met another man?" He looked at her without rancor, almost benevolently. "Even if you slept with every man on earth, my love would still survive." And since then, what had seemed a blessing began to turn into a nightmare. She was married to a monster, an assassin. What was that story about financing an army of mercenaries to intervene in a tribal war? How many other men had he killed to keep them from troubling their marital peace? She could blame the war, the traumas he had suffered, the hard times he had been through, but many other people had endured the same experiences without emerging from them convinced that they were the instrument of divine justice carrying out some grand plan. "I'm not jealous," Igor used to say whenever he or she set off on a business trip, "because you know how much I love you, and I know how much you love me, and nothing will ever happen to destabilize our marriage." She was more convinced than ever that this was not love. It was something sick and morbid, which she would either have to accept and live the rest of her life a prisoner to fear, or else free herself as soon as possible at the first opportunity. Several opportunities arose, but the most persistent, was the very last man with whom she would have imagined building a real relationship. The couturier, whatever. Okay. It's like couture with another IER at the end. Couturier, whatever. I'm French. Who is dazzling the fashion world, growing ever more famous and receiving a vast amount of money from his own country, so that the world would understand that the nomadic tribes had solid morals, or had solid moral values that were completely at odds with the reign of terror imposed by religious minorities. He was a man who increasingly had the world at his feet. Whenever they met at fashion shows, he would drop whatever other commitments he had, cancel lunches and suppers just so that they could spend some time together in peace, locked in a hotel room, often without even making love. They would watch television, eat, drink, although he never touched a drop of alcohol, go for walks in parks, visit bookshops, talk to strangers, speak very little of the past, never of the future, and a great deal about the present. She resisted for as long as she could, and although she was never in love with him, when he proposed that she leave everything and move to London, she accepted at once. It was the only possible way out of her private hell. Another message appears on her phone. It can't be. haven't been in touch for 2 years. I've just destroyed another world because of you, Katyusha. Who's it from? I haven't the slightest idea. It doesn't show a number. What she meant to say was that she was terrified. We're nearly there, remember? We haven't got much time. The limousine has to maneuver its way toward the entrance of the Hotel Martinez. On both sides, behind the metal barriers erected by the police, people of all ages spend the whole day hoping to get a close-up look at some celebrity. They take photos with their digital cameras, tell their friends whom they've seen, and send messages over the internet to the virtual communities they belong to. They would feel the long wait was justified for that one moment of glory, catching a glimpse of an actress, an actor, or even a TV presenter. Although it's only thanks to them that the celebrity industry keeps going. They're kept at a safe distance. Strategically positioned bodyguards ask anyone going into the hotel for proof that they are staying there or meeting someone. Then you either have to get out the magnetic card that serves as your room key, or else be turned away in full view of the public. If you're having a business meeting or have been invited for a drink at the bar, they give you your name to the security people, and with everyone watching, wait to see if what you say is true or false. The bodyguard uses his radio to call reception, and you wait there for what seems like an eternity, and then finally, after that very public humiliation, you're allowed in. Those who arrive in limousines, of course, are treated quite differently. The two doors of the Maybach are opened. One by the chauffeur and the other by the hotel porter. The cameras turn on Iwa and start to shoot, even though no one knows who she is. If she's staying at the Martinez and has arrived in a fancy car, she must be important. Perhaps she's the mistress of the man she's with, and if she is, he's having an extramarital affair. There's always a chance they can send the photos to some scandal rag. Or perhaps the beautiful blonde is a famous foreign celebrity, as yet unknown in France. Later they'll find her name in the so-called People magazines and be glad that they were once only 4 or 5 yards away from her. Hamid looks at the small crowd pressed up against the metal barriers. He has never understood this phenomenon, having been brought up in a place where such things simply don't happen. Once he asked a friend why there was so much interest in celebrities. "Don't assume they're all fans," said his friend. "Since time immemorial, men have believed that being close to something unattainable and mysterious can bring blessings. That's why people make pilgrimages to visit gurus and sacred places. But cons? It can be anywhere. They might catch a distant glimpse of something elusive celebrity, or some elusive celebrity. For the adoring crowd, away from a celebrity is like being scattered with ambrosia dust or manna from heaven. It's the same everywhere. Take, for example, those massive pop concerts that seem more like religious meetings, or the way people are willing to wait outside some sellout performance at a theater just to see the superclass entering and leaving. Take the crowds who go to football stadiums to watch a bunch of men chasing after a ball. Celebrities are idols, icons if you like. After all, they do resemble the paintings you see in churches, and can become cult images in the bedrooms of adolescents or housewives, and even in the offices of industrial magnates who, despite their own enormous wealth, envy their celebrity. There's just one difference. In this case, the public is the supreme judge. And while they may applaud today, tomorrow they'll be equally happy to read some scandalous revelation about their idol in a gossip magazine. Then they can say, Poor thing, I'm so glad I'm not like him. And they may adore their idol today, but tomorrow they'll stone and crucify him without a twinge of conscience. Alright guys, I'm going to stop here and carry on tomorrow. But yes, thank you for listening to me read. Alright, namaste. I'll see you later.